just got a fax, Sara Fritz, from someone named Stanley. I can't, oh yeah, it's Amelia Stanley of Quinlan, Texas. She says November 3rd's election winners: 1, the Clintons; 2, sexual harassers; 3, gay, homosexual, and lesbian rights; 4, medical marijuana drug rights; 5, partial birth abortion and all abortion rights; 6, big government socialism; 7, moderates, lukewarm, middle of the roaders; losers, the truth.
Well, I think it's good to remember that this was an election about Congress and about the governorships, and the people who won were the Republicans. Sure, the Democrats had some pretty stunning victories, but the Republicans are still in control of the Congress and also the state houses.
But you know that you're the first person I've heard say this in the last 12 hours. Most people on the air have been saying it's a big, huge, enormous Democratic victory.
I thought it would be good to remember that.
So what does it mean, do you think, going forward? Because there are articles in the papers this morning, and I know you'll be writing about the impeachment inquiry. What's the first thing you think about looking at the election and then moving to the next week or later on this week to find out what's going to go on the impeachment inquiry?
Well, first of all, I think it's pretty significant that Chuck Schumer is on the House Judiciary Committee.
For the moment.
For the moment. But this is the moment now is when this impeachment inquiry is going to be conducted. And Schumer owes a lot to the Clintons as a result of his victory. They helped him win. And I think we can expect him to be speaking out very forcefully against impeachment. Another thing I think is a lesson to be learned from this experience, and maybe much less obvious, is that there are a lot of people around who have been sort of wringing their hands about what happens when the president is constantly under investigation. Does this destroy a presidency? And in this circumstance, I think we've seen that being under attack made the Democrats really do a better job of campaigning this year, and something maybe Republicans ought to think about. I don't think you would have seen these Democratic victories that we've been talking about had it not been for the fact that the Democrats felt under siege.
Houston, Texas, for Sara Fritz, originally from Pittsburgh. Good morning.
Oh, hi.
What are you reading?
Well, I'm reading the Houston Chronicle, but I was actually calling Brian about some other things I heard. By the way, let me congratulate C-SPAN on the election coverage. I was tuned in to you most of the night last night, so...
Oh, thanks. I'll tell Susan Swain and Connie Brode, who worked hard, and our guests. Appreciate it.
Okay. Anyway, I was calling because I'm an independent, but what happened here in Texas, now I saw a lot of coverage about what went on in California and what went on in New York with Alfonso D'Amato being defeated and so forth, but... I haven't heard in the media any discussion at all about what happened here under George Bush. They took every statewide office and, worked its way all the way down. Let's see, Lieutenant Governor, Attorney General, Comptroller, Land Commissioner, Agricultural Commissioner, Railroad Commissioner, 4 seats that were up on the Texas Supreme Court, State Board of Education. And I haven't heard any discussion of this, but that seems like a big Republican victory to me. You know. Thanks.
Sara Fritz, what's this going to mean?
Well, we're really seeing more state legislatures becoming Republican in this election, and that's a pretty significant victory as well. Again, the standard wisdom about a Democratic victory here needs to be looked at a little more skeptically.
Let me just show you the Wall Street Journal, because Jackie Calms has a piece today that has a quote or two from George Bush, and so does Jerry Seib. I'm interested, meaning talking about the presidency, and I'll make up my mind once my legislative session gets started in January, he said in an interview. I've got a job to do. But on the issue front, right over here in Jerry Seib's piece, you can see here this little quote: "I'm going to say the election was a mandate for tax cuts," Mr. Bush, a likely presidential contender, said in an interview yesterday. Washington, D.C., for Sara Fritz.
Hello?
Hi, what are you reading?
Washington Post.
What's the story?
Well, the big story is the election results, but one segment of that is the victory of Russell Feingold.
Wisconsin.
He did not use any money for his campaign, and he won anyway.
And what do you think that means for the future discussion?
It means something for integrity. you hear an awful lot about it these days, and it's a word that gets thrown around. Here we've got a shining example of it. He followed his own conscience, did not take the money, and seemed to be doomed from the very beginning, and he won.
Sara Fritz, what's this mean?
Well, certainly it will be interpreted as a good sign for campaign finance reform. But there have been other signposts along the way that haven't been observed in terms of showing that the public favors campaign finance reform.
John McCain won almost 70% of the vote out for the Senate. Did he do some of the same things that Russ Feingold did?
No. He, as far as I understand, he ran a very traditional campaign. But it is not unusual, not completely unusual, for candidates to win by saying that they will not take campaign contributions. I don't know how Glenn Poshar did in Illinois. Did he win?
He lost.
He lost. But he has traditionally won in the congressional races by making an issue of not taking campaign contributions. So, and there are other members of Congress who have done that.
Let's go to Inverness, Florida next. Good morning. Reading the St. Petersburg Times.
Yes, good morning.
Hi.
Proud to be a Floridian this morning.
Why is that?
Oh, Governor Bush. I'm so happy that the race card that the Clintons and Mr. Gore tried to play down here didn't work.
Why do you think Mr. Jeb Bush was elected down there? What was the reason?
Because I think Florida's ready for a big change.
Why are they ready?
Because the schools are so bad, and his partner came from the schools committee, and I think they've got great plans. The poor people down here, black and white, both want the voucher system.
We're looking at the front pages of newspapers at the museum this morning, and that's Jeb Bush on the screen. And that's the Boca Raton newspaper. Any comment on what she said about vouchers?
No, except I'd like to comment on the Bush brothers. I think that that's a real bright spot for Republicans in this election. The Bush brothers have a kind of celebrity and appeal that is non-ideological, that could be of great value to the Republicans in the future.
There are a lot of photographs in the papers this morning. Here's a James Slosiak Journal Times photograph in the New York Times, and it's the Reverend Jesse Jackson with Jamil Gouari, Executive Director of the George Bray Neighborhood Center in Racine, Wisconsin, as he led people gathered for a Get Out the Vote rally on Monday. Will he run, and if he does, what impact will he have on the Democratic side of things?
Jesse Jackson? Mm-hmm. I think less impact than he has had in his previous bids.
Toledo, you're on with Sara Fritz, who went to Denison University out there in Ohio.
Hi, Mrs. Fritz, and hi, Brian. I'm calling from Toledo, Ohio. We've got the Toledo Blade. It's been traditionally a Democratic slanted paper forever and ever. But what I'm calling about and what I'm so excited about is I worked for the Reform Party, and this has renewed my faith in humanity and America that Jesse Ventura has won governor in Minnesota. We worked so hard since 1992, thousands of us standing out in the cold and the rain and not getting any press except for you guys on C-SPAN. We're so proud of C-SPAN for letting us get our message out.
Can I ask you a question right now that I'd be interested in what your chemistry is all about? What if, where is your head on the Reform Party and Ross Perot and the future? What if Jesse Ventura, people want to, move him to the national scene, and Mr. Perot wants to stay up there on top of the party?
Well, I believe that Ross Perot is a tremendous patriot. If all you have to do is be able to get some insight into the man. I've personally sat with Ross Perot on 4 separate occasions. He's a guy that just loosens his tie, kicks his feet up on the desk, and sits there and says, well, what do you people think? What should we do? He doesn't dictate. He doesn't, It's hard to explain, and I don't want to get real bubbly about it because then I'm going to be accused of being a Perot Easter or whatever they say out there.
That's okay. You made your point. Thanks. I want to ask Sara Fritz what impact she thinks the Reform Party victory in Minnesota, it's a governor's race, will have on this place over here.
Very little on this place, meaning Congress. Yeah, I don't think much. But it will have an interesting impact on the Reform Party. Your question was right on target. Is this something that Ross Perot wants to, does he want to cede the leadership of this party to someone else? I don't think so.
So what will happen eventually? I mean, do you think the nation's Reform Party members, and a lot of them do watch this network, will want to move toward the Ventura camp on this kind of thing, make him a national figure?
I think the Reform Party members have always wanted to move on beyond Ross Perot to state and local elections, to really electing people instead of being seen as they are sometimes as kind of just the platform for Perot to get on national television.
Now, you've done this for years. You were 14 years with the Los Angeles Times and 3 years with U.S. News and World Report and 9 years with United Press International and on and on. You've watched these elections. When you have something like this happen and all these newsrooms begin to look for feature stories, we already heard from Ron Elving, they've already dispatched somebody to Minnesota. Where else do you dispatch? I mean, there are articles on the Bush brothers everywhere this morning. Do you still dispatch people to Texas and to Florida?
Right. Oh, of course. I mean, that's a really intriguing, and that's why the Bush brothers are such an important element in this election, because they attract attention. And because otherwise you see a fractured Republican Party we're struggling to find leadership. And of course, here you see two people, sort of stars.
Who else would you say will get those feature stories and enamored media giving them attention?
Obviously, Chuck Schumer would be one, particularly as a result of his continued presence on the Judiciary Committee. I think that will be a very...
Any new members of Congress? And we showed a group earlier, and I think we had a couple mistakes where we're trying to correct them.
I'm trying to think of who else would attract...
What about the Udall family members, Mark and Tom?
Obviously. That's another brother combination. So often what attracts attention has nothing to do with politics. It has to do with human nature and human relationships.
I can hear the people falling off the couch on that one, saying, that not being surprised at all to hear that it's not driven by the politics. Lorraine, Ohio, what are you reading this morning?
I'm reading in the Morning Journal that Boyle wants the vote result delayed amid money laundering uproar against Voinovich. There's a new controversy that came to light on Monday, and the Ohio Elections has said it will investigate allegations Voinovich tried to hide the source of money paid in 1994 to a company controlled by his brother to cover the salary of a political ally. The complaint was filed last week, but did not come to public attention until Monday, and the commission scheduled a preliminary hearing for December 10th.
And did that surprise you?
I was surprised. I didn't know about it until after I voted.
Who filed the complaint, I wonder?
You said that Mary Boyle filed it? The candidate?
Mary Boyle says she wants the vote results delayed. She doesn't want them certified. It was filed... I don't know that the article says who filed it, but I was surprised with all the last-minute publicity in Ohio that there was nothing when they announced Voinovich's election on any of the major news broadcasts yesterday. That because if he is found guilty, he will be removed from office.
Yeah, we got a photograph of Mary Boyle on the paper we're showing over at the museum. Remember the Dornan Sanchez investigation and the others that they've had here. You think this will follow its way to the Senate?
Well, the Dornan Sanchez and some of the most controversial ones were not matters of ethics, but matters of vote count. Those are the ones that really become contentious.
When you were watching the results coming in overnight, what was your most interesting surprise?
Surprise.
Or as you sat there as the managing editor of Congressional Quarterly, you said, I want to do a story on that.
I think one of the things is to see D'Amato lose and look at what impact that might have on the Banking Committee. Phil Graham will now be the Banking Committee chairman, and he is a much more conservative, ideological Republican, and so I think that might influence directly the whole discussion about financial services reform and other issues before the Banking Committee.
How about any other chairman will change on the House or the Senate side?
Not unexpectedly that I can think of.
Are there two obvious members that would replace? I guess they won't, because they'll still be in the House. Bob Inglis and Chuck Schumer on the Judiciary Committee.
Right. So they up until the end of the year, they will continue to be there.
When will Henry Hyde announce what he's going to do?
Well, that's not clear. We know that they're going to meet next week and begin to do some work. What's so confusing about their approach to this is, if they were going to finish the investigation, as they say, before the end of the year, they would have their plans more firmly in place. We don't have a good idea exactly what they're going to do. I suspect what they're going to do is come back next week and say, we cannot finish this investigation before the end of the year, so perhaps we'll just have a hearing or two.
Milwaukee, Wisconsin, reading the Milwaukee Journal. Good morning.
Good morning.
What are you reading?
Our headlines, of course, Feingold, narrow winner. The reason I'm interested in calling, I've been hearing this over and over again about Feingold not spending money. Feingold spent as much money as Newman did, and I never hear anybody talking about it. And in fact, even nationally, when he was being touted as having turned down all of this money, the ads were still running, and he was letting them run.
How much money was spent on his behalf in the state? Do you know?
Well, I wouldn't say that it's minimal. There's no way. He was on constantly.
That's a very good point, Brian. The McCain-Feingold bill would not take private money out of public elections. And even though he was, and this is a good demonstration of that, he was adhering to the rules that he wanted to see put in place, but those rules do not prevent money from being, big money from being collected.
Bradenton, Florida, reading the Bradenton Herald with Sara Fritz at our desk from Congressional Quarterly. What would you like to tell us about?
Yes, on the top half of the front page is, of course, Jeb Bush and George Bush. The bottom half is a lot of local election. Even though I'm an independent, I voted straight Democratic yesterday, and of course I'm a little disappointed in that. But I have a trivia question that I want to ask. President Clinton, as far as I know, does not have a home in Arkansas. Where does he vote?
That's a good question. I assume he votes in Arkansas still. But you're right, he does not own a home there.
Don't they sometimes, when they're like, they list as an address a relative or a friend or something like that?
Of course, his mother is dead, but...
Brother live there?
His brother lives there.
We don't know, though, do we?
No, we don't know.
There is a story on the AP all about the families, and the Kennedys, the Bys, the Tafts, the Udalls, the Sununus, and the Wallaces. And it says things here like, on the Democratic side, Kennedys didn't fare too badly either. Democratic Representative Patrick Kennedy, 31-year-old son of Massachusetts Senator Ted Kennedy, and nephew of JFK and RFK, spent little and soared to re-election in Rhode Island. Senator Robert F. Kennedy's daughter, Kathleen Kennedy Townsend, won re-election as Maryland's lieutenant governor, running on a joint ticket with incumbent Paris Glendening. Yet another Kennedy offspring, Mark Shriver, won his Maryland state delegate race. In Ohio, Bob Taft, the son and grandson of U.S. senators and the great-grandson of President William Howard Taft, captured the governor's mansion. Next door in Indiana, Democrat Evan Bayh, the state's governor from '89 to '97, played down his party label and won the U.S. Senate seat that his father Birch held in the 1960s. New York, Mexico, Democrat Tom Udall, son of Kennedy administration Interior Secretary Stuart Udall, won a traditionally Democratic congressional seat over Republican Bill Redmond. His cousin Mark, son of longtime Arizona Congressman Morris Udall, held on to a narrow lead early today in his bid for the U.S. House seat in Colorado. In Alabama, George Wallace Jr. won a comfortable victory over Democratic incumbent Charles Martin for the Alabama Public Service Commission seat. Wallace is 47. Representative John E. Sununu, the son of John Annan,
Well, the one person you don't have there is Skip Humphrey.
It's up at the top.
Oh, is it?
Yeah,
Okay.
And also,
he lost.
And Bob Casey's son Pat lost.
Did he?
In Pennsylvania. We had a comment the other day. Mo Udall has Parkinson's disease and has been in a Washington hospital for a long time. And somebody called or asked, and I was listening, and asked whether or not he was still alive. Do you happen to know? I've not seen any obituary on him. He's been very sick for very long.
I don't know, but I think he's still alive.
And there was a story in the New York Times about Senator John McCain going out to visit him on occasion, although he doesn't speak or, doesn't. I don't think he knows or doesn't recognize people. Beloit, Wisconsin, you're next.
Hi. I've got a copy of the Wisconsin State Journal. Eyes on Senate is the big headline. Newman's challenge to find gold last late in the night. I would like to challenge a caller from Milwaukee who said that Feingold spent as much money as Newman. It's not true. There was outside money, and Feingold told them to not advertise for him.
I don't think the caller was saying that he spent as much, but that he spent plenty.
On voter turnout, the Voter News Service via AP indicated a 38% voter turnout this year, falling just slightly below the 38.8% turnout of the last midterm election in 1994. Since 1970, the voter turnout in midterm elections has fluctuated between about 37% and 40%.
It's actually interesting. It was expected to be lower than that this time. I mean, this was really expected to be the most dismal turnout ever, and both parties, or at least, I shouldn't say both parties, the Democrats worked very hard to bring out the vote, and I think they succeeded.
I had a hallway conversation with somebody earlier who said that Congressional Quarterly was the only publication that predicted what would happen right last night.
Right.
Is that true?
We did.
What'd you predict?
We predicted pickup of 2 seats.
Pickup of 2 seats in the Senate?
In the House.
In the House, and it'll end up being
and stand pat in the Senate, and what it will end up being
6, or loss of the Republicans will have lost 5 or 6.
So, I mean, we were close, not accurate.
Plymouth, Minnesota. What are you reading, please?
The Star and Tribune about the Ventura victory, and
did you vote for him?
Well, no, I don't know if I'm on the wrong line, but no, I would not have. I'm more of a Republican, and I'm just kind of. I want to apologize, actually, maybe to the nation that we could have let Jesse Ventura in.
Why do you apologize?
Well, just for the fact that he is kind of an unknown quantity. He's maybe a loose cannon, and we really don't know what his policies are going to do to affect some of the stability that Minnesota has.
Why do you think then, why did he get 37% of the vote and the Republican 34 and Skip Humphrey get 31 or something like that?
Well, one, he came in and kind of divided the two candidates that would have just kind of battled out between themselves. But then, and I think what really happened was a lot of us, the Democrats and Republicans, just stayed home. And as another caller had said, that his youthful vote mobilized, and we've now got a pro wrestler running our whole state, and that makes me a little concerned because of some of the public programs that he might cut that would be catastrophic for a lot of the people with disabilities. And
why would he do that? Because he's a wrestler?
Well, not necessarily because he's a wrestler. I didn't mean to throw it out as that kind of a slur, but that he's in his campaigning, he's acted very tough, and it has sounded as if he might pull away some of the money from some of the programs that Minnesota has worked so hard to get in the limelight and to be progressive with curb cuts and vocational wheelchair help. And
thanks, caller. Sara Fritz?
Well, I guess he raises 2 concerns. One is about the 2-party system, and you know, candidates like Jesse Ventura always prove eventually to be good for the 2-party system, to kind of call the 2 parties to attention. And you know, I remember when Ronald Reagan was criticized for, well, he's just an actor. and therefore he'll be a lousy president. And I think we've proven over time that a person's previous occupation does not necessarily mean that they're going to be a poor politician. Look at the people who ran this time. We've got former baseball players and football players and wrestlers and actors, and that's the nature of American politics.
Of all the people who left Congress, and there were lots, I mean, it wasn't a record year or anything, but who you think will be the most missed person that's gone? Jerry Solomon left. He was the chairman of the Rules Committee. I don't mean that he'd be the most missed, but people are there. Sid Yates won't be back. Vic Fazio, the number 3 person in the party, won't be back.
Well, I was thinking in the Senate, Dale Bumpers, who has always delivered a very good speech, would be obviously a person that would be missed in terms of the kind of rhetoric that he delivers. And
any idea who will take Vic Fazio's spot in the Democratic Party in the House?
I don't know.
Wilmington, North Carolina. What are you reading this morning?
Yeah, the Wilmington Morning Star.
Yes, sir. What's the story?
We were here in Wilmington, Leland, North Carolina, and Brunswick County. Sheriff Ronald Hewlett maintained his sheriff position with about a 2-to-1 vote over the Republican candidate there. And I tell you what I think. I believe this was local elections, and Clinton wasn't so much involved in it because I think there was a lot of crossover. Now, me and my wife, we voted, and on it was electronic vote, first time here in Brunswick County. And what we did, we block voted. There was a lot of candidates, and we voted 2 Democrats, 1 Republican. And like I say, we're unaffiliated, but I think there was a lot of that's going on, and I don't believe the media is reporting that. Your comments?
I'm not aware of that phenomenon. I'm sorry.
Where do you vote in this area?
I vote in Arlington, Virginia, in the Williamsburg Middle School.
What will it mean to the city, to the country, that Marion Barry is no longer the mayor of the District of Columbia?
I think it will mean a great deal. I think it's actually more important than a big city a normal big city election, because this is the nation's capital, and the problems here have been problems not just for the people who live here, but for people who visit and who consider this their capital. And it is an embarrassment for the nation's capital to be in such poor shape physically and financially. And of course, the Lodge Faircloth defeat will have some impact on this as well, because he was the head of the D.C. subcommittee.
Here's a picture on the front page of the Washington Post. Anthony A. Williams Wright talks with Pat Jones at the Anacostia Public Library as the district's outgoing mayor, Marion Barry, looks on. How long do you think Mr. Williams will be hand in hand with Marion Barry now that he's been elected?
Not very long.
Why not?
I think that he was elected because he was not Marion Barry. He was the very opposite of Marion Barry. This man is a sharp pencil guy, which Marion Barry wasn't. And I think the people who voted for him expected him to do a very different kind of job.
Panama City, Florida, for Sara Fritz of Congressional Quarterly. Good morning. What are you reading?
The News Herald. It appears that Florida's going to have a Republican governor, a Republican legislature, and it's a very bleak day in the state of Florida. And I'm a 4th-generation Floridian from Bay County, Florida.
What makes it bleak?
Well, we don't even, in the News Herald, it's so Republican, it doesn't even give the other side. It's becoming a fascist state. Nobody even runs against the Republicans here because we have no Democratic Party in the state of Florida.
What do you mean by a fascist state?
Well, Jeb Bush plans on having the National Guard on the roadblocks. So if you plan to go vacation, you really don't want to come to Florida. It's going to be a very sad day. And
but I'm not sure I understand, though. What kind of roadblocks, and how will you use the National Guard?
Well, we have roadblocks here in Bay County where our Sheriff Guy Tennell makes a mockery of the Constitution and the fact that you're supposed to use a system and not just pull over people because you suspect them. In fact, the last roadblock he pulled over a black FBI agent, and because he was black, but then they realized that it was an FBI agent. And so this man wrote a great editorial in our paper. And the editorial page, every once in a while, the bright light comes through, and they'll actually publish something that goes against the Republicans. But here, Charlie Hilton runs everything, and he's a Republican. And well, I'm going to give you an example. On October 11th, Sunday paper, they had the story about how Henry Hyde dropped the last 3 charges on Newt Gingrich and how the Republicans were all clapping each other on the back. And then it said, for more on this, turn to page 6A, Gingrich. And I looked through the entire paper, and they just failed to publish that half, which would have probably had the Democratic response. But this is nothing new. On the same day, on the front of the local page, it was on October 11th, on the front of the local state, it had veteran votes Republican on the news section, as if that's news, and that's not news. That's just...
Okay, we get the point. Anything you want to...
Well, I think this caller is very discouraged by the results of the election. I mean, it's good to remember that currently the governor of Florida is a Democrat. And, Brian, it always amazes me that we look at these elections for all kinds of things except whether, the main thing I think that occurs here is whether a person ran a good campaign or not. Particularly in these low turnout midterm elections, what is rewarded is political professionalism and whether you run a good campaign. And the truth is that Buddy McKay, who was Jeb Bush's opponent, did not run a good campaign.
By the way, this fax from Glenn Copeland regarding Jesse Jackson. I think Jesse will play a big part in 2000 politics. He will run again, and what's more, payback time, he will be Al Gore's running mate. Let's go to Falls Church, Virginia, here in the suburbs. Good morning.
Good morning. How are you?
I'm good. What are you reading?
Well, I actually was calling because you had asked earlier whether or not Congressman Mo Udall was still alive, and I wanted to let you know that he is, definitely. He's in the VA hospital long-term care here in Washington, D.C.
Thank you for doing that. By the way, just how do you happen to know that? Have you been there? Have you worked there?
Yes, I have. I actually previously worked for him on the Hill, and my husband is his stepson, so we go to see him from time to time, and in fact are going to go up today to tell him about the results of Mark and Tom out west.
Well, can he, what kind of shape is he in? And I don't mean to overdo this, but we hear so many different things. Maybe you can bring us up to date on can people visit him or what?
Well, people, certainly family goes to see him and, occasionally some of his close friends, but that he is in very much advanced Parkinson's disease has taken over, and it's very difficult to know exactly what he is able to comprehend. It's very difficult. He doesn't respond too much, frankly, anymore.
How old is he now? Do you know?
I want to say, I'm sorry, how old?
75. Hey, thank you very much for a nice call this morning. Did you know Mo Udall?
Yeah, I covered some of his campaigns. He was just a delightful person. It's very sad.
Columbia, South Carolina, for our Sara Fritz. Good morning.
Good morning. I'm calling in reference to a call earlier you had from Charleston concerning the Hodges and Beasley race.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Hodges won strictly on the gambling issue, the lottery. We've got the best governor, or we'll have the best governor that organized gambling can buy.
See that on the screen right there? That's the Columbia State, your capital newspaper, and it says South Carolina bets on...
South Carolina bets on Hodges.
Yeah. Hollings wins, Democrats roll.
Right, and the other reason that Hodges won is he got 92% of the black vote, and then some people are saying 94%. Something like 450,000. Which made a difference because this election, 100,000 voted, 100,000 more blacks voted than in the previous election.
How did that particular group get out the vote, in your opinion?
I don't know. I think that the Democratic Party was just better organized. They just energized the black voters. And I'm not saying that as in a biased way. I'm just saying they did a good job of getting out the vote.
Thanks. 6th term for Senator Fritz Hollings.
That's amazing. Well, and he's still the junior senator, you know.
How many terms does Strom Thurmond have?
Oh boy, I can't.
7, 8. You know, all you have to do is ask this audience anything, and they'll have the answer for you in about 3 minutes. Pembroke, Massachusetts, from the Boston Globe. What are you reading?
The Salucci-Harshbarger governor's race.
What's the final percentage? Does it say? It's close. It was what?
Yes, it was like 51 to 48%.
And who did you vote for?
I voted for Paul Salucci, even though I'm a registered Democrat.
Why did you do that?
Because in Massachusetts, everything's Democrat, and I feel that Salucci's done a good job since Bill Weld left, and that he wants to continue on the same course that Bill Weld was for the state, which I think is lowering taxes and trying to lower the income tax rate, which I think it would be a boon for Massachusetts.
One of the names that comes up in the morning papers is your Senator John Kerry and the year 2000 presidential race. Will he run, in your opinion?
Yes.
And how will he do?
I don't think he'll win, but I think he will run just because he's been around for so long. But I think that Al Gore will win the national, domination.
Okay, thanks. Last night, some network had a poll that showed that Al Gore only had something like 39% against George W. Bush at 50-something for the presidency in the year 2000.
My goodness.
How do you? I mean, I've seen other polls like that, though. What do you think that's about?
Well, I think certainly Al Gore is going to have trouble. He's going to be the person who has to face up to some of these problems that have been created by the president for his party. Despite yesterday's results, the Democrats feel that they have been very much hurt by some of the behavior of President Clinton, and Al Gore is the person who's going to have to deal with that.
In the New York Times, we showed this photograph earlier. I'm showing it for a reason because our next call is from Indianapolis. This is Evan Bayh and his wife and sons. He won big out there, beat Mr. Helmke by 60-something, I think, to 30-something. Indianapolis, what are you reading in Indianapolis Star?
Yeah, thank you very much. Well, Bayh wins. Democrats pick up seats. State, actually, the Democrats picked up the majority in the Congress here. And
what happened in the 9th where Lee Hamilton used to serve?
Barron Hill won that. He retained the Democratic seat, and I like the guy. I'm an independent, tend to be Republican, but I like Bayh. I split my ticket, and I think some good candidates came out here. I think Bayh is the right guy, and I think he may be the next candidate for president for the Democrat Party, quite frankly. He and Bush.
He's quite young. How old is he?
He's about 40.
He's already been governor for 2 terms.
Well, he's very, very influential. Very good.
And what about Dan Burton, who was running against a man who was either
on Comedy Central?
Say that again?
His opponent was featured on Comedy Central. He got about, I think, 10% of the votes or something.
And he had been charged with something. Was he ever convicted of anything?
Well, I think he's had some small mishaps in the past, but quite frankly, the man is not even remotely qualified. That's the problem there. I just want to comment briefly, and also I want to thank you for your coverage. It's very non-biased and very enjoyable throughout the entire campaigns. About something Sarah said, and I think this is the key to the whole deal. Jesse Ventura's win encouraged me. I think a number of people would like to see a viable third-party alternative, and the primary way I see to do that is cut back on spending, and you cannot expect people that are incumbents in Congress to vote to lose their power base. You're going to have a commission that does this on a nonpartisan basis to tell them, I don't care if it's a constitutional amendment or something that's done that says, here is what we're going to do, and we're going to regulate this. So it doesn't become a game of who's got the most money. And people like Ventura and the other gentleman in Wisconsin who won will have real chances, and people have an opportunity to pick the right people. And I think this third-party thing may give us some of the real bipartisanship that we've been missing. And with that, I'll let you go and see what your thoughts are on that, Sarah. Thank you.
Well, as I said earlier, I agree that anytime there's a third-party challenge, it tends to call the two parties to attention, and I think that's what's going to happen here as well.
I don't know whether we can do this or not, but we're going to go live to Marietta, Georgia in a few minutes. And I just happened to see on the monitor a picture of our camera picking up the the wall that Mr. Gingrich will be standing in front of. Yeah, they agree with you, as you can look up on the screen, that they're calling it America's victory. So when you sat down here at the beginning, you said the Republicans had won. What do you think of that slogan? How will that play?
Well, the problem with the Republican victory is that the Republicans don't appear to be in position to capitalize on that victory. The Republicans, and particularly Newt Gingrich and the leadership in the House, is terribly divided over impeachment, over taxes and Social Security, over any number of issues. And so even though they retain a small edge in the House, they don't seem to be in the position to do what one would do with a victory.
Here's the New York Times from today. It's by James Bennett, and the headline is, "With Friends, Clinton Views Returns as Positive for Him." Picture of him yesterday taken by Stephen Crowley at it looks like it's in the cabinet room over at the White House, an economic meeting. And we have a fax here that says the following: a landslide for Republicans in this election would have been the kiss of death for George Bush in 2000. The results of this election will send a clear message to the Republican leadership to get back on track. It will energize conservatives to run a national election in 2000. George Bush will win the next election for president, in part as voters, especially those in the middle, repay his father via his son for the Bill Clinton mistake. Even moderates who do not want Bill Clinton impeached now know that electing him twice has been an embarrassment to this country. Most also know that the rosy economic picture has been a result of a Republican-led Congress. Finally, the Clinton administration will continue to lead us down such a dangerous foreign policy path that no voter in 2000 will want to entrust that domain to Al Gore or any other Democratic hopeful. There's no one that signs this, by the way. So.
Oh, that's too bad. Well, it's interesting, though, that if George Bush were the nominee 2 years from now, that idea of we'll correct the results of the last two elections would probably be a very prevalent argument among Republicans.
Your competitor, the National Journal, do you consider that your competitor?
In some ways.
They have this report here. It'll make it easy for us this morning. Somebody dropped this off here. In the Senate, it'll be 55 Republicans, 44 Democrats, and 1 undecided at the moment. That's the race out in Nevada. In the House, 223 Republicans, 211 Democrats, and 1 independent. That's Bernie Sanders from Vermont. And in the governor's races, 31 Republicans, 17 Democrats, 1 independent, and that's the governor of Maine, Mr. King, Angus King, and 1 Reform Party member now, Mr. Ventura. Let's go to Denton, Texas for Sara Fritz. Good morning.
Good morning. How are y'all today?
We're doing good, sir. What are you reading now?
I miss seeing you at Borders. I just moved back home from D.C. I just wanted to congratulate the Democrats this morning for using what a law professor of mine used to use at GW for using nullification of lying before a grand jury. And I think they did a heck of a job. But down here in Texas, we're very happy this morning that we finally, all our statewide offices are now held by Republicans. And this is very important in Governor Bush's run for the presidency, which is why I moved back home to volunteer my services to work with Governor Bush. And I think that with the Bush brothers, we hope that it'll nullify the 52 electoral votes in California. We'd like to know your thoughts on that and how they can energize between the Hispanic votes and the other minority votes. I noticed last night I'd like to know if you have any information on how the minority votes were handled in Florida. And also, does anybody know if B1 Bob Dornan won last night?
He lost big.
He lost. The calculus of minority politics in this in the Bush campaign is a little bit hard for me to anticipate. But I think you make a good point that he can appeal to Latino voters who have traditionally been Democrats.
On Monday, we talked a lot about and irritated a lot of our callers when I read almost the entire Sally Quinn article about what Washington thinks of this president. Did you have time to read that piece?
I think I read part of it.
Style section. The reason I mention it because Sally Quinn's agreed to come on here and deal with this on Friday at the 8 o'clock hour for about an hour, and I brought it up because I want to know, is there a different feeling inside this beltway, inside the media, about this president than there is outside this country? I
think so. I've heard that said, and I think so. I hear I hear people inside the Beltway judging Clinton as if he were a peer. I see people outside the Beltway judging him as if he were the president. And that's a little, I think that's where the phenomenon to which you can attribute the difference. The people inside the Beltway say, this guy, I wouldn't have done that. And so he's screwed up. The people outside the Beltway tend to say, well, he's the president of the United States.
Are you saying that people inside here think they're on the same level with him?
Yeah, I am.
And are they?
In fact, I would say that because of his age, a lot of people in the press see him as a contemporary and have always judged him as such.
Fremont, Indiana, reading the Fort Wayne Journal-Gazette.
Hi, Brian, a great newspaper. It says, buy Trounce's helm key. That's pretty dull. We knew that was going to happen. I voted for buy. What I'd like to ask about is Jesse the Body Ventura. In the 80s, I had 3 young boys, and they gravitated to WWF wrestling, watching that, so I watched it with them.
World Wrestling Federation.
Yep, and there was a guy on there that was just magnetic, Jesse the Body Ventura. He was the star. I was just wondering what drove this in Minnesota. Was it just the force of his personality? Was there issues up there that drove this, or was Hubert Humphrey's son just plain? How could he get beat?
Well, go back just a second, if you don't mind me asking you, because I mentioned earlier that on cable television that 8 of the top 20 programs are either World Wrestling Federation or the Turner Wrestling deal. What is it about wrestling that so many people are attracted to? It's always been a huge draw on cable.
Well, it's kids, and I saw in one of the headlines you had up there that he brought out the young vote, and I watched it because my kids watched it, and I kept watching it because it was funny. It's a soap opera. They're just putting on a show, and Jesse Ventura was the soap opera star. He was absolutely fantastic. He was far and away the most magnetic personality in the whole thing, and I still watch it to this day. The kids are teenagers, and wrestling's big. It's even with kids who know it's fake, know it's ridiculous. There's a show there, and then my kids still watch it, and they're smart. My son's captain of the football team. He was the citizen of his class, and he'll sit there and watch this wrestling.
Thanks. Let me ask you, I may be overdoing this, but will there be a time when the media will shift from being fascinated by Jesse the Body Ventura to being cynical or negative or derisive because he was a wrestler?
I think that's the problem about being that kind of candidate. Again, let's compare it to Ronald Reagan. He became a known quantity because he was an actor. But it came at a price, and the price was that he was frequently derided for being just an actor. Of course, the other thing was, that people underestimated Ronald Reagan, and I think, again, they underestimate Jesse Ventura, quite possibly. We tend to think that if you're not a lawyer or a professional politician, somehow you're not qualified to run for office. And that really is not our tradition as a country.
St. Cloud, Minnesota?
Yeah, hello. I want to talk about Jesse the Governor Ventura also.
How long do you think the body, in quotes, will remain in the middle of his name?
It's the governor now.
And you like that? I can hear this guy's voice. You like this, don't you?
Well, I'll tell you why. There are some issues behind him. But primarily, the fact is that he wasn't a lawyer. Secondly, he's a fiscal conservative and a social liberal, which in his past history, he's a former pot-smoking, free-market atheist. We need some people like that in our society to talk about issues and not just values and all these non-issue issues. He wants to legalize industrial hemp for the farmers. He's a person who, in his wrestling career, has traveled around the world to Japan, to other nations, has a broad culture of these foreign lands so we can see each other as human beings, not Americans and Japanese and Indians and Pakistanis, but we can view each other as humans. And these fiscal conservatives and social liberals, we could call it the middle, but it's really not the two parties and where the young people are moving. We're not Republicans. We're not Democrats.
How old are you?
I'm 31.
Sara Fritz?
I think it's fun to see somebody like this enter a race. He brings the new sense of to politics, and indeed, politicians do mimic people like this. Professional politicians realize when they see somebody like Jesse Ventura coming down the road that maybe there's something there to be copied.
Tammy Chappelle of Reuters took this picture that you'll see up there on your monitor, and this is of the speaker. Is he a bigger man or a smaller man today in the eyes of the American people, or is he the same? And what is he like in his party? And will he run for president in the year 2000?
I think if I were to name the loser here, I would name Newt Gingrich in this election. The Republicans won, but Gingrich has got a very, very divided party. And the first issue that they're going to be dealing with is whether to proceed with impeachment. And his party is going to be very divided over that, and how they read the election results. And, you know, I don't want to be in his shoes right now.
Cornelius is frustrated in Virginia and writes, why is it that all the major papers declare that Democrats have won? No emphasis has been placed on the fact that it has been 70 years since the House and Senate has been controlled by the Republican Party. Although this is a disappointment to Republicans, this midterm election was a stalemate. This trend in the media of supporting and emphasizing what happens only to Democrats seems to support the statements made that they are liberal and support their causes. Do your guests or yourself have any comments?
Well, I think, as I said at the beginning when I walked in here, I believe that the Republicans won. They control the Congress. But quite frequently, the newspaper coverage works against expectations. So the Democrats were expected to do poorly. They did better than they were expected. I'm not so sure I see that as a bias, but just a sort of natural tendency.
By the way, it'd be interesting to know whether this story would be on the front page, up top. U.S. finds it hard to attract support for strikes on Iraq. It's on page A19 of the Washington Times today. King Fahd told Cohen, that's the Secretary of Defense here, that Saudi Arabia doesn't approve using its territories as a springboard for attacks on Iraq. A Saudi official told the Associated Press yesterday. Troutwood, Ohio, reading the Dayton Daily News. Good morning.
Yeah, the article I'm commenting on is the Democrats hold down GOP gangs, and it goes on to say Republicans appear certain to retain control of the Senate, but dreams of a wider majority seem to have evaporated. And basically my comment is I am just so happy that a lot of the minority vote got out to vote this election, because it seems like they are always discounted, you know, that they are non-voters. So I hope that this proves that the minority vote is important, and I think that in the year 2000 it would be shown to be a greater power than it's usually given credit for.
All right, thanks. If you were Jesse Jackson today and you saw what happened yesterday, what would you conclude from that?
I would claim credit if I were Jesse Jackson today. He had a lot to do with bringing out the African American vote, and while it may not propel him into the vice presidency or the presidency, as some people have suggested in these calls, it certainly does substantiate the role that he has always sought to play in the Democratic Party, which is to be a representative of African American interests.
We're waiting to go to Marietta, Georgia in a few moments for the Newt Gingrich News Conference. This program will be early today. We start at 6 o'clock, if those of you who just tuned in. Not that that matters to you. Back to the story about the U.S. finds it hard to attract support for strikes on Iraq. Right beside it is forces in Gulf adequate against Iraq, U.S. says. There's the Dwight David Eisenhower, the carrier over there, 20 other combat and support ships. There are 174 Air Force, Navy, and Marine combat and support aircraft in the area, including more than 50 on Eisenhower. The United States has said it reserves the right to take unilateral action against Iraq. Do you think if we weren't talking about this election, this would get a lot more attention?
I'm certain of it.
And what do you see in this story?
I see decision on I don't really see any great change in U.S. policy, but an effort on the part of the United States to try to develop a consensus among allies.
Later on in the story, it says lukewarm international support for a military strike evaporated in the weeks before Secretary General Kofi Annan ended the last crisis. Where are you calling from, please? Caller?
Minneapolis.
Minneapolis, welcome.
This is Dan McGough. I was calling. I have the Minneapolis Star-Tribune. It has Ventura wins.
Yeah, we've been watching that a lot today.
Yeah. I guess I was calling in part to a previous caller that was surprised that Humphrey didn't win.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess I'd like to start off by saying that our state's been kind of unique and that we've had a two-term Republican governor who has gone through the back door both times. He did not have the support of his party. He was also, or he still is, a physical conservative, a liberal on social issues. As far as Jesse Ventura, he was mayor of Brooklyn Center. Did, from what I can understand, a very good job of bringing in people that weren't part of the political system there. He did leave it as an improved city. So I guess I'm kind of hopeful that we're going to continue a Minneapolis sort of thing where we aren't really supporting the hardline Democrats or the hardline Republicans.
Thanks. I do want to say before this show ends that Katie Cole is our producer, and this is her last day with us. She's going to work at CNN, and I want her to hear this right now as she goes over to CNN. We got this from Richard Hood today. He said, last night's election coverage, this is addressed to us, was excellent. It was refreshing to see young people serve as political analysts. Their observation is much sharper than the old guard served up by the networks and CNN. So, Katie, you are 9.5 years older than you were when you came here, and so you will join the old guard over there, but we really appreciate everything you've done for us here. In reference to last night's vote, I'm encouraged that the African Americans voted their conscience and sent most Republicans running home with their tails between their legs. Maybe now it won't be such a big deal to America that we also count Richard Hood. I told the Mooney reporter from the Washington Times to never underestimate the black vote. Sara Fritz just keeps nodding her head. Anniston, Alabama, go ahead.
I just would like to respond to the comment the lady made there about George Bush and a future run for president, maybe. Talking about Al Gore and his low rating now. Al Gore is going to have some problems of his own, and blame it on Bill Clinton's actions. Al Gore's got some problems of his own. The media has promoted this sex thing, not the Republicans. And it's a diversionary action. The real mess is the campaign violations, campaign finance violations.
Agree with that, Sara Fritz?
No, I don't. I think the Republicans have had played a big role in promoting this case against Clinton on the Monica Lewinsky.
By the way, this network will cover those hearings on Monday that are supposed to occur. Charles Kennedy is having a subcommittee hearing in the Judiciary Committee on the process and what is an impeachable offense. You can find it here, and all those hearings will be on this network. St. Paul, Minnesota. Go ahead, please.
Good morning.
I think Minnesotans have awakened this morning. We've got a lot of calls from there.
I've been awake a long time. I have on the editorial page, R.J. Tice's somewhat yesterday's analysis before Ventura had won. But it was pretty obvious, that he was so funny. And everybody loves a funny man. And we all tuned in. And I also feel that the national press, after they came to St. Paul for the Paula Jones hearing, picked up on Ventura, gave him tons of publicity, special interviews on CNN and so on. And he just went through the roof. And yesterday when I went to the polls, there were such long lines, and I thought I knew it. Never did see so many young people, but it's interesting in the analysis because he did not just win the young people's vote.
Did he get your vote?
Of course not. I hope that I can only wish that Miss Fritz will have a governor like Jesse in her home state, because I don't feel that we will be served well.
How do you know he won't be a good governor?
First of all, the caller before from Minnesota who said he was mayor of Brooklyn Center was incorrect. He was mayor of Brooklyn Park. his record certainly was not one that people in Brooklyn Park thought was so great. He used to be a talk show person. If you listen to him, some of his, as they would put it, social, whatever here, are pretty far out. You know, he handled the situation well when he said he wanted to legalize prostitution. He only thought we should think about it. You know?
Wasn't when your previous governor was elected, wasn't he also a third-party situation?
Arnie Carlson,
yeah.
Basically he was a Republican, but we had a huge scandal with the Republican candidate. And
Okay,
so Arnie came in.
Let me let Sara Fritz respond, because she was hoping that you would have this man as your governor someday.
Well, you know, he won the election. I think it bothers me in American politics these days to see people say, well, he's not qualified to be the governor because he's not the kind of candidate that we're used to. The man won the election, and I think it's going to be very interesting to watch and see if there aren't some new opportunities here in politics for a guy like that.
Jill Lawrence has a piece in USA Today, and she calls the winners and the losers and the survivors. See if you agree with her. She says that Hillary Clinton's a winner. Another woman might have fled her marriage or gone into seclusion after the revelations of August and September. Not this one. All over thousands turned out to hear her. Some waved Hillary for president signs. She's a winner. The Bush family. Success is sweet, and revenge might be too. And she goes on to say that Joseph Lieberman was a winner. Once he talked issues and values and religion with Clinton in late-night phone calls. Now he calls the president's behavior over the edge. Mike McCurry, she says, is a winner. The man who got away. Clinton's telegenic press secretary announced during a spring lull in scandal news that he'd be leaving in the fall. Loser, West Virginia, which we talked about earlier. That's a long story. Ken Starr, she says, is a loser. Of the national figures, only House Speaker Newt Gingrich gets lower favorable ratings than independent counsel investigating Clinton. Maybe he'll get a shot at improving his peeping Tom image if and when he testifies before the House Judiciary Committee about the Lewinsky report.
That's Starr? Or
that is Starr. That is Ken Starr she's talking about.
Well, I think there's no question that the Bush brothers are winners. I mean, that's I wouldn't put them number 2 on that list. And it's true that Hillary Clinton succeeded in changing the view of her during these last couple of months. But in the long term, I'm not so sure I'd call her a winner.
Newt Gingrich is supposed to start his news conference called America's Victory in about 3 minutes. We go to Osakis, Minnesota, another Minnesota call. Good morning.
Yeah, Brian, you're the first mind on television, and I want to talk fast because I'm a grandfather. My wife's a grandmother, naturally, I guess. And we don't watch television wrestling, but we very much supported Jesse the Body Ventura because he has some real issues, and they're genuine issues in the state of Minnesota. For example, he believes that the budget surplus in this state belongs to the voter or to the taxpayers and should be returned to the taxpayers. He had the guts to tell a group of college kids that higher education is not a God-given right and that they have the right to work to get their college education, and that if they want to, they can join the Army and serve their country and go to college on the GI Bill instead of having some magic program established by the state to give them free education.
How old is the new governor?
47, I believe.
And you voted for him, and when did you make the decision?
I made the decision when I first watched him in the televised debates. Another point that he makes that I think is an issue point is that he believes that all laws in the state of Minnesota and all programs should have sunset clauses. And another thing is that he speaks in plain language and he does not use the jargon of the professional politician, and so people can trust him because he's not thinking in ready-made, off-the-rack, store-bought thoughts.
Okay, thanks.
It's interesting that the debate had such an effect on that race. So it's in a sense, unfair to say it was just his celebrity.
And we carried all those debates here on this network, and we want to thank Steve Scully as our political editor and his team, who did a great job of bringing in 100 and, I don't know what the final count was, 115 debates out there at all those Senate races, governor's races, and some of the House races. Let's try to grab another call as we wait for Newt Gingrich. We go to Lynette, Alabama, for Sara Fritz of Congressional Quarterly. Go ahead, please.
Yeah. Hi, Brian.
Hi.
Thank you for C-SPAN.
Welcome.
This is the home of Governor James, and
Governor Fob James is who you're talking about.
Yes, and I'm very disappointed. But one thing we can say about him, he stuck by his guns. He didn't switch. He didn't want the lottery in. And, of course, it still has to go through the legislature, so we may not get it. And I want to ask you about Arkansas. Did Governor Huckabee...
He did win.
Oh, and I was up there last week, and boy, you think there was mud slinging in the Arkansas on TV and radio. And another thing, if the Republicans had brought out the cross burning on I think it was Missouri, they had that if you voted for the Republicans, you're voting for the cross burning, and the Republicans were going to have cameras at the polls. Now, you know that if the Democrats had done something like that, what the press would have done to us.
Thanks.
She raised a point early on that interests me, which is to say that this idea of using the lottery to fund education is still something that needs to get through the legislature. This is obviously an appealing idea in campaigns this year, and it will be interesting to watch and see how it plays out, whether it's just a campaign gimmick or whether it's something that people are considering seriously.
The caller before that was a man who said he was a grandfather and grandmother. It just reminded me that when you've been doing this show for a lot of years, and when you walked in, I asked you, how's Mary, who I've never met, and you sat here carrying Mary years ago. How old is Mary?
Mary's 13.
That was your first child.
Right.
There's another one.
10-year-old Dan. And you're right. I came here long before I had either one of them.
You probably first came here with U.S. News and World Report because you were in 1980 when we started the call-in shows.
But I'm not a grandmother yet.
14 years with LA Times and then with the Congressional Quarterly as the managing editor. What's the big difference between doing this job and daily newspapers?
Well, obviously I'm a manager now and not a reporter, but this is a publication. I really enjoy this publication because we cover government in a very serious way. And I'm not entirely sure that newspapers these days are really committed to covering government.
Alexandria, Virginia, waiting for Newt Gingrich, who is somewhere in Marietta, Georgia. Go ahead, please.
Oh, yes, Brian. I am calling because I'm reading the Washington Post where it says Williams wins big in D.C. mayor's race.
Anthony Williams, the new mayor of the city of Washington.
Correct. And the reason I'm calling is in response to what Sarah said earlier about Williams' win. She had said that he is a pencil and something man, that he's very shrewd, which he is. But she fails to note, and I think many reporters haven't noted this, that she did not beat Mayor Berry. And therefore, for a very long time, he will have to deal with Berry supporters. He may never go out on his own